I'm sitting here with William Debois, a photographic artist specialising in portraiture. So William, you've had a prolific career, starting commercially and really moving into the fine arts, visual arts, with your photographic practice. So let's unpack it. What are you? Who are you as a photographer? What motivates you?
I'm a commercial photographer primarily. I've started calling myself an artist for maybe 2-3 years because my work has been going more towards personal projects. My commercial practice is obviously supporting my art because it's slightly difficult to make a living as an art photographer, but at the same time it's become a very important part of my activity to produce projects I'm really keen on, and obviously getting funding is part of the whole process. But as an artist, really, what I'm interested in is humans and their environment or their heritage and their makeup as such. What constitutes a human cultural entity, in a sense. So I don't want to make it sound too sort of philosophical, but obviously I do a lot of portraits, but also I've done a lot of work with homes, people's interiors, which are actually also called portraits, even if the people aren't in them. I'm just showing elements that will, in a sense, define people.
And so where did this interest in people and their place in the world come from? You're born in France and spent a number of decades in your life living internationally, and now you're residing in regional Queensland in the city of Gladstone. Is it some of that influence of your time in France?
I come from a very rural area where the community, the sense of community is quite strong. The element of stories, personal legacy, personal history is quite important in that area. I think this has always fed or fueled a sort of interest in background story, knowing what makes people, what constitutes their identity. And portraiture is a very good way of trying to compile that perception of people into something that's visually kind of interesting. I can't paint, I don't write, I'm not a musician, so that was the only way I could really express my, in a sense, my appreciation of people through photographic portraits.
And so the communities, I guess, of where your childhood was fostered and your time in growing up, and now you're based in Gladstone. So Gladstone's a unique city in itself, largely derived, I guess, from the mining sector and the exploration and transportation that supports that industry as well. It's got an incredible rural aspect to it, so perhaps that links to your childhood times, but it's also got this abstract, almost unique alien-like landscape through this industry as well. So yeah, how have you found your response and your, I guess, relocation to Gladstone as a town?
So your point about being an alien, so almost alien landscape, that's actually really, that's a very strong element of my interest in Gladstone, because it is completely alien to me. You know, we had absolutely no industrial sites where I lived. You know, I mean, I spent obviously the first part of my life in France. I spent 16 years in England. In neither of the countries did I experience the kind of scale you have in terms of industry here. Even if it's not very, very obvious, you know, it's not in your face all the time in Gladstone, but you know it's there, you know it feels, I mean, it fuels the town in every single aspect, basically, including the arts, and it keeps feeding that interest in people and stories.
And so how has it been for you? How many years have you been here for, and how have you found, I guess, taking your commercial photography practice and then developing your fine art practice. Has that been supported? How does it exist in Gladstone?
Yes, I've been here 9 years now, and I mean, first of all, the fact is that I've never met as many artists as in Gladstone. I was surrounded by artists in France when I was doing my studies, in a sense also in Britain when I was doing my degree, but once I left the education environment, basically that kind of stopped. I was connected with photographers, but they all were commercial photographers. Here, basically, I was literally surrounded with people who had a practice that was completely different from mine. You know, some were working with textile, of sculpture, ceramics, all sorts, and that it's like a petri dish. You see things that influence you, and also you hear things. People talk about the next project they're working on and how it's going to be funded and what they're going to work with, and ultimately they encourage you to basically do the same thing. You know, they can see that you've got a practice, but even if it's not really developed, they kind of say, "Oh, if you apply for this, maybe you can do your project." So that's how I heard about RADF and how I got to do my first application basically because somebody said, "Well, you should really get paid to do this." And it's like, okay, I thought, well, who's going to pay for me to actually take pictures, you know, unless it's a commercial project. And the fact is that there's a structure here that I've never really experienced in other countries. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist in other countries. What I'm saying is basically at the time I was not exposed to it. And because it's a smaller community, you do get exposed to it a bit better. It's a bit like having a support network that is far more accessible than in a larger city.
Yeah, and you're right, like the Australian funding model is very interesting. So we have 3 levels of government in Australia. You have the federal, the state and the local. And when we talk about RADF, the Regional Arts Development Fund, your application went into the Gladstone Regional Council. So that is a sort of dual partnership between local government and state government, so divulged from Arts Queensland through the Minister for the Arts. And each local government area in Queensland has the opportunity to partake in the RADF fund. I mean, it's unique in Australia. It doesn't even exist in New South Wales. So I've had the opportunity to work, you know, in New South Wales and Queensland as an arts worker and curator, and I feel that, you know, some of the best supported artists in Australia are Queensland artists through funds like this. But in saying that, we also have a very big state where, as you say, really active communities and communities of artists live, like Gladstone. And yeah, RADF really supports that opportunity. So it's interesting to hear that, you know, we might think of Gladstone as an industry-based town, but it still has this really vibrant undercurrent of leading practitioners.
Yeah, and furthermore, comparing to Britain, for example, you might have some places like I was in Plymouth, for example. So I did come across some artists, especially photographers, who were extremely talented. Clearly had some ambition, and pretty much systematically they would head to London, and they wouldn't choose to stay in Plymouth, and they had the feeling that there was no way for them to develop as an artist in a place where they lived and where they studied. And I think in Australia, I say in Australia, I should really mention Gladstone, because you said that it's not the same everywhere else. The opportunity is there to actually stay and practice, and it feels that you do not have to be in Brisbane. You don't have to be in Sydney to evolve as an artist, and you can enjoy the lifestyle we have here, which is pretty exceptional, and at the same time just grow as an artist. The flip side is not being particularly exposed to trend, current, practices, techniques. I don't really get to talk to other photographers who are in the same situation as me, unless I go to, places like Melbourne and Brisbane, and it's rare. So that's the flip side.
Yeah, and you're right. Like I've had the opportunity to hear both sides. I've lived and worked in metropolitan and regional Australia, and I hear metropolitan artists often say that regional artists are so much luckier, and then I hear regional artists say that metropolitan artists are so much luckier. So I'm like you. I think regional artists are more fortunate, mainly because I do think there's a great regional arts network and support from government and also from community. But you're right, the opportunity to really delve deeply into a specific practice or into a specific discipline is often hard. And yeah, travelling is an important part of having a regional practice, and so it is that balance as well. So I guess let's look at that really. I guess what's missing in the opportunities with regional practice, and what were you seeking through your RADF application to Gladstone Regional Council to really support your practice to go to the next level for yourself?
I've never really been, in a sense, ambitious enough to think, okay, I'm gonna take this project and I'm gonna take it everywhere until this particular project, which is Sacrifice. The project that came before were effectively, it was vital for me. It was really crucial that I did them. There was a certain element of a visceral need to create these things, and I really strongly believed in them. But at the same time, it wasn't vital to take them to the next level and show them to a larger audience. It was non-essential. I was quite happy to just create the thing, do my outcome report and put it in a box, and that's it. Which is kind of sad, but Sacrifice is different because it involves actual people, because there's stories involved in actual stories collected. And I think it's important that stories are read or heard, not just put in a box for later. It's not a conservation project, it's not a historical project. Going from having the project initial creation of the photography funded through our EDF and throughout Queensland led to thinking about what can I do with this and what sort of help could I do with. So that's why I asked for funding from our EDF to employ you and Ashley from Node Solution. That led to a collaboration that meant that I could concentrate on what I was actually doing. And that's fantastic, because quite frankly, having that to do as well as all the artistic work, you're already doubting that your project is is valid, is interesting, is worth doing. Having to, on top of this, basically having to promote it to people, having to talk to people about it all the time, day in, day out, it would have broken me, It's much easier to create the thing and then put it away rather than just. So the help I got through, from you and Ashley meant that it could be taken further. There could be a future for that project.
So let's take us back to that time. I guess since mid 2021, yourself and NEOT Solution, which includes myself as creative director and Ashley Salter as technical director, have been able to support you to really take Sacrifice as a body of work, still a living body of work, and try and connect with audiences who are part of it, and also who might resonate with some of the messages and concepts inside Sacrifice as well. So yes, that first component was your success in being a finalist at Head On Photo Festival in Sydney, which is an incredible feat for one of your portraits. So maybe talk us through that portrait, because it is a standout portrait in that body of work.
The project is essentially me asking two questions. What does Sacrifice mean to you, and what sacrifice have you made? And obviously I photograph them in front of this backdrop here. I met Vivian Mallow when she was protesting against police violence in front of the Parliament House, I believe, in Melbourne. And I spoke to somebody who introduced me to her, and I met her partner, Robert Thorpe, and they were incredibly welcoming. They were extremely open-minded, and we had very long conversations about Sacrifice, effectively. Ironically, the actual the story I collected from her is basically a single sentence. It just says, "I sacrificed my flesh to live." Vivian had breast cancer. She had double mastectomy, and she was quite keen to actually to show that the sacrifice for her was literally flesh. So I photographed her in the back garden at her house, and it was a very, very natural process. It came from her. I didn't ask her, well, can you take your clothes off? She was basically ready, and we produced that image, which is quite arresting. One of the few occasions where I just felt, okay, well, this is actually a collaboration. I'm not telling the person to do anything for me as such. I'm literally creating the context, and then they can be what they want and tell me what they want. And that put an imprint on the rest of the project, in the sense that every single time I almost kind of expected the people to be as genuine as Vivian was. And there's a few people who basically couldn't really answer the questions, like, they would literally self-sacrifice nothing. And to me, that was actually really quite good enough, because in a sense, the project is as much about sacrifice as it is about privilege and equality. So there's really a feeling of series, that every story has to be read within the context of the others.
And you're right, it's part of a larger body of work, and a very small component of that larger body of work then was part of PhotoFest as well, head on, and was able to be shown at Gaffer Gallery. And I guess that's the part where myself and Ashley were really able to support you as an artist. So it gave you the space and place to be an artist and support you in what you wanted to share through the exhibition, but removed you having to be the curator, the exhibition designer, the contract negotiator. I think you were slightly involved in the transport and printing because of the nature of the work. So yeah, through this collaboration, I do see our support as a collaboration. You were able to exhibit in Sydney as a solo show, which in a COVID period as well. So some of the technical support behind the scenes was also about arranging installers, and the solo exhibition opened, but with a large digital support. So each work in the exhibition was supported by a QR code that then unpacked these oral histories of your multiple sitters as well. So yeah, I guess the support of RADF then allowed the engagement of a curatorial and project management team to allow you to be an artist as well. And I know we tried very hard to get you down to Sydney, but travel restrictions were a little bit hard in 2021. But yeah, what did it mean for you being able to exhibit as a solo artist in Sydney? What does it mean for your practice?
I think being selected for the actual festival itself, that was, even if it was in the open category, which means that none of the actual production costs were covered by the festival, it still meant basically somebody had looked at my work and saw, okay, this is worthy of an exhibition, is worthy of the biggest photo festival in Australia, basically. And it's a bit like awards, you think, okay, you work very, very hard on your project, and you put into loads and different awards, and you get rejected, and then there's just that one where you kind of get picked, basically, and it kind of justifies all the hard work you put into all the previous submissions. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like a prize at all. It feels like it's an opportunity for me. It's not an end in itself. So the fact that it was in Sydney, that's great. Basically meant a lot more exposure, and it most importantly means that I can take this and show, look, somebody's taken me seriously, and maybe you should too.
I always challenge this notion of assumption of being a regional artist. I always say that you're an artist who chooses to live regionally. So yeah, I guess that opportunity to exhibit, in Sydney, in a capital city, does give you that validation when you then have those conversations back in your home areas.
The good aspect of it is also that having exhibited in Sydney, I don't have to necessarily have it as a name. For that particular project, it's more important to show it to regional audiences who might be able to connect with it better. And I know for traveling through very, very small towns, basically, that sacrifice basically in in tiny little villages and regional towns. Basically, it's part of your life, basically. So I think it probably means to them a little bit more than it might in a metropolitan city. I don't know. Could be wrong.
And I guess that's where the stage 2 of this support from RADF really leads, and that's that the Resolved exhibition at Gaffer Gallery in Sydney was a great component of the photo festival as well. But now the body of work has come back to Central Queensland, and we're now working together on developing it as a travelling exhibition, reaching those regional communities. So some of the work that we're doing behind the scenes is, I guess, reaching out to our regional gallery network and creating opportunities for Sacrifice to continue
that's
work.
right. That's a very, very important aspect to me. That's a project that is nowhere near finished. I'm not bored with it. I'm frustrated that basically I've got so much commercial work that I can't really, I'm not finding the time to shoot at the moment for Sacrifice. And one of the exciting prospects of working with regional galleries is to possibly have residencies or workshops, things like this, that will allow me to produce more work for future exhibitions.
Can you just tell me what was it like, even putting yourself out there and applying for RADF? If people are thinking about pitching their project, what type of advice or steps should they go through to really have a successful application?
Yeah, so the very first application I put through to RADF was for a project called the CS Women, which was very, very personal. It was dealing with depression, and it was dealing with my own depression. So for a start, I was not in a frame of mind where I could easily put words down that would make a great deal of sense. And essentially what the application requires is for the artist to make sense of what they're doing, to be able to identify not only what the idea is, but to boil it down to its core, and to discard anything that is just the fact. It's just the kind of slightly messy ideas that come with the core image, the core idea. And working in the application was excruciating. It was just horrible, because I couldn't find answers to questions such as, what is the benefit of your project to the community? Because I was going through depression. It was basically notion of value is is a little bit warped when you're sick. So it was a real effort to try to answer that question, and it was near impossible for me to nail it. So it literally took me probably about 3 weeks for me to complete the application. But it was my first application. It was successful. There was no. They accepted the budget exactly as it was, and I was a real surprise. I kind of expected to be rejected, or at least some of the costs to be taken off. That's probably where I could start calling myself an artist, because at the end of the day I was being funded to do an art project, and that makes you an artist, right? I would say my advice to artists who are interested in applying for funding is to think about the fact that the first one is definitely going to be very, very, very hard. There is help available, but sometimes it's not the help you need. Sometimes people say things like, well, what you should do is, and I've got to say I've got a bit of an objection to people saying, well, what you should do is, because at the end of the day, you kind of know what you should be doing. The expertise, basically, that, for example, you and Ashley have in wording things, that's really what is needed for an artist. So,
what would you say are the key successes to your experience and how you've been supported?
Yeah, so the actual aim for the project was to create a set of elements that could be used to obviously attract interest from galleries and create a schedule of exhibitions. And that's been achieved, definitely. Beyond expectations. I mean, the actual prospectus itself is fantastic. We've used it to exhibit at GAFA. We've managed to book a number of galleries for me using that particular prospectus, which means that people are taking it very seriously. They can see the benefit of taking that work, showing it in front of their community. And that is exactly what the project was set to achieve. Yeah, you've done a fantastic job. It was really, really amazing.
Yeah, well, full credit to you, and a lot more to come. So, touring exhibition of Sacrifice, commencing in 2022, and at the moment sort of tracking through till 2024. So.
Yeah, which is kind of weird because I've never really worked with kind of very long-term things like this. But you know, it's healthy as an artist to think in longer terms, not to go from one project to another. There's still probably going to be some like little side projects, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with dedicating like a big chunk of your life to just one thing.
Well done, William. Sacrifice has plenty more to come from it.
Thank you.